My husband had been dead for 11 days when his mother sat across from me at my own kitchen table and told me that if I kept the baby, I would never see my stepdaughter again. 11 days. I was still wearing the black dress I had worn to the funeral. I was still finding his handwriting on grocery lists and losing my breath every time I did. I was 5 months pregnant with a child he had wanted so deeply that he had painted the nursery himself before he got sick. And his mother sat in the chair he used to sit in, folded her hands on the table like she was running a business meeting, and said those words to me like they were reasonable. She was not grieving. She was negotiating. That was the moment I understood that everything I thought I knew about my husband's family had been wrong. And it was the moment I decided that for the first time in my life, I was going to stop being the woman who made peace and start being the woman who made records. If you have ever been told to choose between your children while you were still bleeding from a loss no one should survive alone, stay with me. Because what Diane did next made that first conversation look like the opening move in a game she had been planning for a long time. Before I tell you everything, I want to ask you something real. If someone used your grief as a weapon, used the worst week of your life to try to take your children and your future, would you fight back? Or would you go quiet, the way people in pain sometimes do, because the fight itself feels like one more thing you cannot survive? Tell me in the comments what you would have done in Ava's position. And if you have ever had someone treat your loss as an opportunity, I want to hear that too. Stay until the end. This story earns it. My name is Ava. I am 34 years old. I am a mother, a widow, a woman who has spent the last 2 years rebuilding a life that someone tried very hard to take from me while I was too devastated to see it clearly. I am not a dramatic person. I was not raised to fight or to hold grudges or to see malice where there might be simple grief. That quality, that instinct toward generosity and patience, is the thing that almost destroyed me. I am telling you this story so that if you are ever where I was, you will recognize it sooner than I did. I met Marcus when I was 28. He was 33, a structural engineer with kind eyes and the most genuine laugh I had ever heard from a grown man. He had a daughter from his first marriage, a 6-year-old named Lily who had her father's eyes and her own fierce, particular way of seeing the world. His first wife had died in a car accident when Lily was 3. Marcus had been raising her alone for 3 years by the time we met. He was not looking for someone to fill a role. He was not looking for a mother for Lily. He was just trying to live, and somehow the way he was living crossed paths with the way I was living, and something real grew between us without either of us planning for it. I want to be clear about one thing from the start. I did not try to replace Lily's mother. I never called myself her mother. I let her lead. I waited for her. I read to her and made her school lunches and sat through every recital and every bad dream, and every day she told me she hated me and meant something completely different. I loved that child the way you love someone who was not yours first, but who becomes yours anyway, slowly and completely, and with no contract and no guarantee. Marcus and I married 2 years after we met. Lily was 8. She was the flower girl at our wedding, and she took that responsibility so seriously that she rehearsed her petal-dropping walk for 3 weeks in the hallway of our house. That is a memory I keep in a place where nothing can touch it. Marcus's mother, Diane, was a presence in our lives from the beginning. She was a tall, composed woman in her early 60s who wore her silver hair in a way that made her look like she was always slightly more important than wherever she was. She had been widowed herself about 10 years before Marcus and I met, and she had turned that loss into a kind of authority. She spoke about family with an intensity that I initially read as love. I understand now that it was ownership. Diane was never openly cruel to me. That is important to understand. She was not a woman who screamed or threatened or made scenes. She was a woman who managed. She managed her family the way she managed her house, with precision and control and a quiet certainty that her preferences were always the correct ones. She managed Marcus gently, with the particular skill that certain mothers develop for keeping their adult children just slightly dependent, just slightly uncertain, just slightly oriented toward her approval. She managed me through a steady campaign of small exclusions, overlooked contributions, and the consistent gentle implication that I was a guest in a family whose real members been established long before I arrived. I noticed it. I want to be honest about that. I noticed it from the beginning and I chose, over and over, to give it a generous interpretation. When Diane would take Lily for weekends without mentioning it to me first, I told myself she was just an enthusiastic grandmother. When she made decisions about Lily's school activities without consulting me, I reminded myself that I was not Lily's biological grandmother, and perhaps her role carried a weight that mine did not. When she sent Marcus long messages about Lily's emotional well-being that copied in everyone except me, I told myself she had probably just forgotten to add my name. I was building a castle out of generous interpretations, and I was living inside it because the alternative, accepting that the woman who was my daughter's grandmother actively resented my presence in her son's family, was a truth I could not afford to sit with while I was trying to hold everything else together. Marcus knew. I think he always knew, at some level, that his mother's warmth toward me was performed rather than felt. But Marcus was a man who loved his mother and loved his wife, and managed that tension the way gentle people sometimes do, by staying slightly above it, by redirecting when conversations got close to the edge, by being so consistently kind to everyone that no one could quite justify bringing the conflict into the open. I loved him for that quality, and I resented it sometimes too. That is the honest version. We found out I was pregnant about 6 months before Marcus got sick. We were not trying, and we were not trying, and when the test came back positive, we sat on the bathroom floor and laughed, and cried at the same time in the way that only very good news can make you do. Marcus called it a gift. He bought a small stuffed bear that day and put it in the drawer of the nightstand on his side of the bed. He said he would give it to the baby on the day they were born. He painted the nursery himself on a Saturday in September, a soft yellow that he chose because he said yellow was a color that did not require anything from you. It just gave. He was diagnosed with a rare cardiac condition 3 weeks after we painted the nursery. The doctors were direct about the severity. We had options, they said, but the options were not reassuring. What followed was 4 months of hospitals and treatments, and the particular suspended disbelief of a life interrupted by something that should not be happening to a healthy man in his 30s who laughed like that and painted nurseries yellow. Marcus died on a Tuesday morning in November. I was 4.5 months pregnant. Lily was 10 years old. I was 32 years old, and I was a widow, and I was a mother, and I was entirely unprepared for all three of those things at once, though I had been living with the approaching reality of it for 4 months. The days after Marcus died are not something I can describe in sequence because grief does not move in sequence. What I remember is Lily's face. I remember holding her and feeling that my job, the most important job I had ever been given, was to be a person she could hold on to. I remember my own mother flying in from out of state and sleeping in the guest room and making soup every morning even though neither of us ate it. I remember the condolence cards piling up on the kitchen counter and not being able to open them because each one required me to be conscious of what had happened, and I was not always capable of that. I remember Diane. Diane arrived the day Marcus died. She arrived before I had called her, which I later understood meant that the hospital had called her directly, which meant that she had made arrangements to be notified as next of kin in a way that bypassed me. At the time, I did not analyze this. At the time, I was grateful someone else was making arrangements because I was incapable of anything practical. She arranged the funeral. She handled the catering for the reception. She chose the flowers. She coordinated the family members flying in. She did all of this with the calm efficiency of a woman who had been waiting to be necessary and was now, finally, indispensable. I thanked her. I meant it. I was drowning, and she was organizing the shore, and I was grateful. On the 11th day after Marcus died, she came to my house in the morning. I remember the morning specifically because I had slept for the first time in days and woken up for one disoriented second having forgotten, and then remembered, and the remembering was its own particular violence that happened every morning for a long time. Lily was at school. My mother had gone home 2 days earlier, reluctantly, because she had responsibilities she could not keep postponing. I was alone in the house when Diane arrived. She sat at my kitchen table. She had brought nothing with her, no food, no flowers, which I noted without processing. She folded her hands and she looked at me with the expression of someone who had rehearsed what they were about to say and was confident it was the right thing. She said that she wanted to talk about the practical realities of the situation. She said that Lily was her son's child, her blood, and that given the circumstances she felt, it was only right that Lily come to live with her. She said it carefully, but she said it fully, without softening. She said that she had a stable home, a large house, no financial pressures, and decades of experience raising children. She said that I, on the other hand, was pregnant, grieving, working a job that would require me to return at some point, and without a co-parent. Then she said the part that I still hear sometimes at 3 in the morning when I am trying to sleep. She said that if I intended to keep the baby, I needed to understand that it would be very difficult for the courts to see me as a stable primary parent for Lily. She said this without raising her voice. She said she had already spoken to a family attorney about her rights, as a grandparent given that I was not Lily's biological mother. She said that the cleanest solution, the one that would cause the least harm to Lily, was for Lily to come to her, and for me to focus on my own child when it arrived. I sat across from her and I did not say anything for a long time. What I felt in that silence was not what you might expect. I did not feel rage right away. Rage came later. What I felt first was a cold, precise clarity, the kind that comes when something clicks into place that has been sitting almost understood for a long time. Every generous interpretation I had given Diane's behavior over the years rearranged itself in that moment into its true shape. The weekends she took Lily without asking. The school decisions made without me. The messages that forgot to copy my name. The way she had managed the funeral as if she were the primary family member and I were an attachment. The hospital notification. It was not a collection of small oversights. It was a pattern, and the pattern had always been pointing toward this. I said very quietly that I needed her to leave my house. She looked surprised. I think she had expected tears or collapse or negotiation. She had not expected a woman who sounded like she was ending a meeting. She stood up slowly, picked up her bag, and said that she hoped I would think carefully about what was best for everyone. Then she left. I went to my bedroom and I sat on the edge of my bed and I put my hand on my stomach and I breathed. And then I did the thing that would change everything that came after. I called an attorney. Her name was Renee Caldwell. She had been recommended to me by a colleague months earlier in a completely different context, but her name was in my phone, and she specialized in family law, and I needed to talk to someone who understood what I was up against before I did anything else. I called her from my bedroom with Marcus's stuffed bear on the nightstand, and I told her everything that had just happened. Renee was calm in the way that good attorneys are calm, not cold but steady. She asked me specific questions. She asked about the length of my marriage, about the nature of my relationship with Lily, about any documented involvement in Lily's care, about whether Marcus had updated his will, and if so, what it said. She asked whether Diane had given me anything in writing. She asked about the family law attorney Diane had mentioned. The questions themselves were clarifying. They told me what mattered and what needed to be found. Marcus had updated his will after our wedding. I had not read it carefully in the years since because reading it felt like rehearsing a loss I did not want to imagine. But I knew it existed, and I knew that Marcus had been specific and deliberate about his wishes, because that was the kind of man he was. I found the document that evening in the filing cabinet in his office. I sat on the floor of that office surrounded by his things, and I read it. Marcus had named me as Lily's guardian. He had done so explicitly and with a written explanation attached that described in detail his reasons, his trust in me, and his understanding of the bond between Lily and me. He had also left specific instructions regarding his mother, which I will not detail fully here, but which made clear that he had not been unaware of the dynamic between Diane and me, and had thought carefully about what he wanted to happen in the event of his death. There was a second document in the same folder. It was a letter, handwritten, addressed to me, dated 6 months before he died. He had written it during the first weeks of his diagnosis, when the reality of what might happen was still sinking in. In it, he told me things that I will keep private because they belong to me. But one thing he wrote I will share because it matters to this story. He wrote that he knew his mother would make things difficult. H. E wrote that he knew she had never fully accepted me and that in the event of his death she would try to use Lily as leverage. He wrote that I should trust myself, trust the law, and trust the records I had built simply by being present every day for 4 years. I sat on that office floor for a very long time. I called Renee the next morning. I told her about the will and the letter. She asked me to scan and send everything immediately. I did. Then she said something that shifted my understanding of the whole situation. She said that Diane's attorney, whoever she had spoken to, had almost certainly told her that grandparent custody rights were limited in our state, and that gaining primary custody over a named guardian would require proving that the named guardian was unfit. She said that Diane was likely pursuing a strategy of building a case for unfitness, and that my pregnancy, my grief, and my status as a non-biological parent were the 3 points she planned to build that case around. She said, "The good news is that none of those things make you unfit. The bad news is that she may try to create evidence that they do. So from this moment forward, document everything." That instruction changed how I moved through the following weeks and months, not in a paranoid way. Not in a way that made me less present for Lily or less honest in how I was grieving, but in a quiet, steady, practical way. I started keeping a simple log. Every time Lily came home from a visit to Diane's house and said something that felt planted, I wrote it down. Every time Diane sent a message that contained an implicit criticism of my capacity as a parent, I saved it. Every time a relative called with concerns that used words or phrases that matched Diane's framing a little too closely to be coincidental, I noted it. I was building a record of a campaign that was being waged against me, and I was doing it while also grieving my husband and growing his child, and trying to be a steady presence for a 10-year-old girl who had lost her father. I will not tell you it was easy. I will tell you it was possible. About 3 weeks after my conversation with Renee, something happened that accelerated everything. Lily came home from a Saturday at Diane's house, and she was quiet in the particular way she got when something was sitting on her that she did not know how to put down. I did not push. I made dinner. I sat with her while she watched television. And then at bedtime, when I was tucking her in, she said something that I had to keep my face completely still to hear without breaking. She said that Grandma Diane had told her that the new baby was going to change everything and that she might have to go live somewhere else because there would not be enough room for her anymore. I asked her what she thought about that. She said she did not want to live somewhere else. I told her she was not going to live somewhere else. I told her this was her home and it was always going to be her home, and that no one was going to change that. I said it with a certainty I was still building, because certainty is sometimes something you speak into existence rather than something you feel first. After she fell asleep, I sat in the hallway outside her door for a long time. Then I went downstairs and I opened my laptop and I wrote down exactly what she had said, the date, the time, and the context. And then I wrote an email to Renee with the subject line, "She is using Lily directly now." Renee moved faster after that. She filed a preemptive motion that established my guardianship rights formally with the court, attaching the will, the letter from Marcus, and documentation of my continuous involvement in Lily's care over the previous 4 years. The filing put Diane's attorney on notice that any challenge to my guardianship would be contested on the record, and that the record was substantial. Diane's response came not through her attorney but through the family. Her sister called me. Two cousins I had never spoken to directly sent messages. An aunt I had met once at the wedding left a voicemail expressing concern for Lily's stability. The language in each message was similar enough that I recognized it as coordinated. I saved every message. I noted every similarity. I sent everything to Renee. What I was beginning to understand was that Diane had not made one impulsive move in a moment of grief. She had a strategy. The strategy had multiple fronts: legal pressure through the grandparent custody claim, social pressure through the family network, and direct pressure through Lily. She was running all three simultaneously, and she had started running them before the funeral. The evidence for the last part came from Lily's school. I had a meeting with Lily's teacher about 4 weeks after Marcus died because Lily's attention in class had been affected, which was completely understandable, and the teacher wanted to coordinate on how to support her. During that meeting, the teacher mentioned, almost as an aside, that a woman she described as Lily's grandmother had come to the school the week before Marcus died and asked to update Lily's emergency contact information to list herself as the primary contact. The request had been declined because I was already listed, but the attempt had been logged. Before Marcus died. She had come to the school before Marcus died. I sat in that small classroom chair and I kept my face still and I thanked the teacher and I asked whether I could have a copy of the log entry. She said she would need to speak to the principal about that. I said of course. I followed up the next day. I got the copy. That document was the moment the whole picture became clear to me. Diane had not been activated by grief. She had been waiting. She had known Marcus was dying. She had known he had made me Lily's guardian, and she had started making moves before he was gone. The emergency contact attempt was a fumble, something that had been logged rather than completed, a sign that she had been careful but not quite careful enough. But it told me everything I needed to know about the timeline. I gave the log entry to Renee. Renee's voice on the phone when she read it was the most satisfying pause I have ever heard an attorney take. The legal process that followed was not quick. Family court proceedings rarely are, but the direction was clear from the point when the guardianship motion was filed, and Diane's attorney received the full documentation package. The grandparent custody claim was filed formally, which I had expected, but it was filed on grounds that required proving I was an unfit guardian, and the record Renee had assembled made that argument very difficult to sustain. My daughter was born in March. Her name is Iris. She was born at 6:20 in the morning on a day when it was raining gently, and the light through the hospital window was the same soft yellow that Marcus had painted on the nursery wall. I was alone for the delivery except for my mother, who had come back, and a labor nurse named Carol, who had the specific, rare quality of making you feel like you were the only patient she had ever had. I held Iris, and I talked to her in the way that people who are alone and full of feelings sometimes talk, quietly and without sense, just sound and presence, and the fact of being there. Lily met her sister 2 days later. She came to the hospital with my mother. She was careful with Iris in the way that 10-year-olds are careful with very small things they are not sure they are allowed to love yet. And then Iris grabbed Lily's finger, and Lily made a sound that was somewhere between a laugh and a cry, and she looked up at me with her father's eyes and said, "She knows me." Yes, she does. She always will. The custody hearing took place when Iris was 8 weeks old. I attended with Renee and with a folder of documentation that Renee described as the most organized record she had seen a non-attorney compile in 20 years of practice. I attended as a woman who had spent the previous 4 months grieving and building and refusing simultaneously. I attended as Ava, and I was every version of that name at once. Diane attended with her attorney and 2 character witnesses, one of whom was the cousin who had sent me the coordinated message earlier, and one of whom I had genuinely never met. Her attorney made the argument that I was an emotionally compromised new mother without biological ties to Lily, that my grief and the demands of a newborn created instability, and that Lily's best interests were served by living with a stable grandparent who had known her since birth. Renee presented the will, the letter from Marcus, the 4 years of documented involvement in Lily's schooling, medical care, extracurricular activities, and daily life, the log entry from the school, the voicemails and messages from the family campaign, the testimony from Lily's teacher, who had agreed to provide a written statement describing my consistent presence and the quality of Lily's relationship with me, the testimony from Lily's pediatrician, who had records of every appointment I had attended, which was all of them. And then Renee presented something I had not known she was going to use. She had located the record of the conversation Marcus had had with his own estate attorney in the final weeks of his illness, a conversation that had been documented in the attorney's case notes, and in which Marcus had explicitly stated that he did not want his mother to have custody of Lily, that he trusted his wife completely, and that he was concerned his mother might challenge his wishes. The judge was a quiet woman who listened to everything with the focused patience of someone who had heard many versions of this kind of story. At the end of the hearing, she said that the record before her was clear and that the challenge to the guardianship was without sufficient legal basis. She dismissed Diane's claim. She confirmed my guardianship of Lily. She noted that the documented pre-death actions taken by the paternal grandmother were of concern, and that if similar attempts to undermine the guardian's authority continued, the court would consider restrictions on contact. Diane left the courtroom with her attorney and did not look at me. I sat for a moment in my seat after the room had mostly cleared, and I thought about Marcus, and the stuffed bear on his nightstand, and the yellow nursery, and the letter he had written 6 months before he died, because he had known, even then, what I would need. I thought about how much he had loved Lily and how much he had trusted me to carry that love forward. I thought about how close I had come to losing the ability to do that. Then I picked up Iris in her carrier, put my hand on her back the way she liked, and walked out into the hallway. The fallout from the hearing came in waves. The family members who had sent the coordinated messages went quiet almost immediately. The aunt who had left the voicemail sent me a brief text that said she had not fully understood the situation and that she was sorry. I did not respond right away. I let it sit. I thought about whether her apology was genuine or whether it was the particular kind of apology that people offer when they realize they backed the wrong side. After a few weeks, I replied with 2 sentences thanking her for reaching out and leaving the door open without swinging it wide. That felt right to me. Diane did not contact me directly for several months. When she did, it was a letter, formal and carefully worded, that expressed regret for the distress the legal proceedings had caused and stated a desire to maintain a relationship with Lily and Iris. I read the letter multiple times. I thought about it for a long time. I talked about it with Renee, who told me that from a legal standpoint I was under no obligation to respond or to facilitate contact, but that from a practical standpoint, a complete cutoff of the children's paternal grandmother had its own complications. I talked about it with Lily. I asked her, carefully and without loading the question, how she felt about seeing her grandmother. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said that she missed the grandmother she used to have before all the scary stuff happened. That answer told me everything I needed to know. The grandmother she used to have, the one who existed before the campaign, before the strategy, before the 11 days, was someone Lily needed access to if that version could still be found. I wrote back to Diane. I was brief and I was direct. I said that I was open to supervised visits with a clear understanding that any further attempt to undermine my role as the girl's parent or to introduce legal challenges would result in the permanent end of contact. I said this without anger and without performance. I said it the way Renee had taught me to say difficult things, as information, not as a fight. Diane agreed to the terms. The visits began, supervised initially and then gradually less so as months passed without incident. I watched carefully. I documented what I observed without paranoia, just attention. The version of Diane who showed up to those visits was smaller than the one who had sat at my kitchen table with folded hands. She was an older woman who had lost her son and was trying, in whatever limited and imperfect way she was capable of, to keep hold of the grandchildren who were the last living pieces of him. I did not forgive her in the way that word usually means. I did not reach a place where what she had done stopped mattering or stopped being what it was. But I found a place that was adjacent to forgiveness, a place where I could look at her across a living room while she read to Lily and held Iris on her knee and feel something that was not warmth exactly, but was not cold either. Something practical and human that said, "This is who she is, this is what she did, and these children deserve whatever genuine love she is capable of offering as long as she does not use it as a weapon again." I keep the letter Marcus wrote me in the drawer of the nightstand on what used to be his side of the bed. The stuffed bear is on a shelf in Iris's room now. She does not know yet what it means. When she is old enough, I will tell her. I will tell her that her father chose it on the day he found out she was coming, that he put it in a drawer and saved it for her, and that he knew, even before she was born, that she was worth saving things for. Lily is 12 now. She does her homework at the kitchen table and argues about bedtime and has opinions about music that I do not always share and is, in every way that matters, my daughter. She asked me once if I was scared, during all of it, during the months when everything was uncertain and the legal process was grinding forward, and I was a new mother and a grieving widow simultaneously. I told her yes. I told her I was cared every single day. She asked me what I did when I was scared. I said I wrote things down, I called people I trusted, and I kept moving. She thought about that. Then she said that sounded like a good plan. I said it was the only plan I had. She said that was okay because it worked. Iris is 2. She has Marcus's laugh. The first time I heard it, I had to sit down. It came out of her at a breakfast table on an ordinary Tuesday morning, and it filled the kitchen the same way his used to. Suddenly and completely, the way a real laugh does when it has not been performed. I sat down, and I put my hand over my mouth, and I cried in the way that some grief does not ask permission before it arrives. And then Iris laughed again because she had found the sound funny and she did not understand why I was crying, and I laughed too, through the crying, because that is the thing about people who are genuinely gone. They come back in the most unexpected shapes. In a laugh at a breakfast table on a Tuesday. In a daughter who is 2 and has his eyes and does not know yet how much of him she carries. I am not the woman I was before Marcus died. I am not the woman who chose generous interpretations over accurate ones because the accurate ones were too costly to look at. I am not the woman who smoothed things over and kept peace in rooms that did not deserve her peace. That woman was kind, and I am still kind, but she was also unprotected, and I am no longer unprotected. I learned to document. I learned to call an attorney at the exact moment I needed one rather than the moment after. I learned that grief is not a disability and that someone trying to convince you otherwise during the worst week of your life is not offering you help. They are offering you a transaction. I learned that the law, used carefully and with good evidence and with the records you build simply by being present every day, is a tool that belongs to the person who has actually been there. I had been there. Every day for 4 years. That showed. If you are in a situation where someone is trying to use your pain as their leverage, I want you to hear this. The records you make today are the protection you will need later. The phone call you make this week to an attorney who specializes in exactly what you are facing is not premature. It is not paranoid. It is not unloving. It is the thing that will make it possible for you to keep loving the people who need you, from a position where you are actually capable of protecting them. I am Ava. I am 34 years old. I have 2 daughters. I lost my husband and I nearly lost my family, and I did not lose either of those things because I decided, in the middle of the worst grief I had ever experienced, to stay present, to take notes, and to trust the evidence of my own 4 years of showing up. That evidence was my husband's last gift to me. He built it with me every day without knowing that was what we were doing. We were just living, but we were living in a way that left a record. And the record was true. And the truth, when the time came, was enough. If you made it to the end of Ava's story, you already know that the most devastating betrayals do not always come from strangers. They come from the person sitting across from you at your own kitchen table, using the worst week of your life to take what they have always wanted. Drop a comment and tell me, what was the moment in this story that hit you the hardest? Was it what Diane said on day 11? Was it the school log entry? Was it Lily's voice at bedtime? Or was it Iris laughing with her father's laugh at a breakfast table on a Tuesday?